Mads Mikkelsen is one of those rare actors who seems like he was grown in a laboratory to play villains. There's something in the sharpness of his face, the way his eyes flicker between warmth and menace, the cool European cadence of his voice. It all makes him feel otherworldly. Hollywood took one look at him and decided, yeah, this guy is going to redefine what bad guys look like. And while Mikkelsen himself has complained about being typecast, you can't really blame the industry. He's just too good at it. He's the kind of actor who can make you root for a cannibal, sympathize with a Bond villain, or pique your interest as an underdeveloped throwaway villain in the MCU. And that's the strange paradox. He's both trapped by this image and elevated by it, building a career where villainy has become his calling card. I've been looking forward to this one. Let's start where most people first got introduced to him, Casino Royale. It was a fantastic choice to have him be the Daniel Craig's James Bond's first foil. He's a banker, a financier of terrorism who happens to be simultaneously really bad and really good at gambling with other people's money. Now, I haven't seen every single Bond movie, but I'd say he's top 5 in terms of sheer menace and screen presence. The subtle arrogance, the calm way he calculates odds, and of course, the bloody eye that constantly leaks tears of crimson blood. It's a nice touch. That torture scene where he swings the rope into Bond's Casino Royales, that's a different type of torture from what we usually see in these big-budget action films. Unimaginable pain, the helplessness of being naked and alone in a dark room, the psychological warfare at play because he knows he'll get the information out of you eventually, but he takes pleasure in the resistance, a futile attempt to delay the inevitable reality. He's a villain who's not untouchable but cornered, clawing his way out with intellect and violence. And what really cements Casino Royale as the perfect showcase for Mikkelsen's villainy is how much of the film's weight rests on his shoulders. Le Chiffre isn't immortal, invincible, or even particularly powerful. Even though that's what he portrays to the world, we as the audience know he's desperate, a man balancing on a razor's edge, hiding panic behind every measured word. That's the genius of Mikkelsen's performance. He distracts us as well as the characters into believing that facade of invulnerability. His silences are threatening, his composure unnerving, and when that veneer cracks, when the sweat beads on his forehead at the poker table or when his voice rises in fury during the torture scene, it lands with 10 times the force because of how carefully he's built the tension. Bond may have won in the end, but it's Le Chiffre who defines the tone of the movie. Without Mikkelsen's cool, fractured villain at its center, Casino Royale wouldn't get nearly the same amount of love because the character itself is somewhat shallow. He gave Craig's Bond the perfect foil to sharpen himself against, and in doing so, Mikkelsen stole half the film. From there, he slides into full gothic horror in Hannibal. The role of Hannibal Lecter had already been cemented by Anthony Hopkins, but Mikkelsen took it somewhere entirely different. His Hannibal wasn't a snarling monster in a cage. He was elegance personified. Cultured, charming, even seductive. He cooked elaborate meals, wore immaculate suits, and spoke with the precision of a surgeon. And then, in the same breath, he could disembowel you without breaking a sweat. This performance was terrifying because of how much you wanted to believe him, to sit across from him at the dinner table and be charmed, even as you knew the meat on the plate might not be pork. Mads weaponized his charisma here, turning the idea of a villain into something irresistible. It's the kind of acting that makes you wonder if the scariest thing about evil is that it doesn't always look evil at all. What's even more fascinating is how he leans into the philosophy of the character. His Lecter genuinely believes his refined worldview elevates him above the rude masses he consumes. Every carefully plated dish, every poetic line of dialogue, is played with the conviction of someone who sees murder as art and cannibalism as communion. He kills people, and then he transforms them into metaphors, into lessons. When he speaks to Will Graham, it isn't with the menace of a predator circling prey, but with the intimacy of a mentor coaxing a student toward enlightenment. The cinematography leans into that seduction, bathing him in candlelight, surrounding him with rich textures and opulent colors, turning scenes of quiet dinners into something closer to religious ritual. It's no wonder the show developed such a devoted cult following. Mikkelsen played Hannibal as the devil you wouldn't mind shaking hands with. Mikkelsen balances control and eruption. For most of the series, he is stillness incarnate. The soft voice, the measured gestures, the careful smile that never reveals its full intent. But when violence comes, it is sudden and horrifying, a glimpse of the monster lurking beneath the silk and charm. The juxtaposition makes those bursts even more disturbing. You're lulled into security only to be immediately reminded, viscerally, of what he is. That tension becomes the engine of the show, the constant reminder that no matter how much you're drawn to him, you're also always one step away from being his next course. He has no exceptions. Lecter is a tragic figure, a man cursed by brilliance and appetite, unable to stop himself from consuming everything beautiful around him. It's this depth, this commitment to layering seduction, philosophy, and brutality that makes Mikkelsen's Hannibal not just a reinvention of an iconic role, but arguably the definitive one for an entire generation. Then came Doctor Strange, which is actually the first film I noticed him in. Now, in terms of Marvel villains, Kaecilius isn't exactly groundbreaking. A rogue sorcerer chasing eternal life could have been forgettable in a million other actors' hands, but Mads makes him intriguing through sheer commitment. The physicality, the calm monologues, the conviction in his eyes when he talks about Dormammu's gift. It elevates this villain of the week into a villain of the last 6 months or something like that. You get my point. He doesn't play him as a lunatic. He plays him as a believer, a zealot, who genuinely thinks he's saving the world by surrendering it to a giant head. That seriousness makes him stand apart from the jokey tone Marvel usually runs with. He brings gravitas to a script that might not have deserved it, making Kaecilius one of those villains you remember even if the movie doesn't give him much time. The reason I'm saying Kaecilius in Doctor Strange is so much more than a stock Marvel villain is because of the way he wraps his ideology in something that sounds disturbingly reasonable. Unlike the usual "I want to conquer the world" template, Kaecilius' obsession with Dormammu stems from grief and disillusionment. He sees the Ancient One as a hypocrite, a teacher who preaches balance and humility while secretly drawing from the very dark dimension she forbids her students to touch. Mikkelsen became a wounded disciple who feels betrayed. And when he delivers that haunting monologue to Strange,
people think in terms of good and evil when really time is the true enemy of us all. Time kills everything.
It strikes at the core of why he follows Dormammu. Kaecilius doesn't really want power. No, what he really wants is to escape from mortality, from the inevitable decay of the world, from the suffering that comes with loss. That's not the argument of a lunatic. That's the plea of someone who has stared at death too long and decided it was unacceptable. Mikkelsen anchors it with such conviction that you almost sympathize with him, even as you watch him try to literally burn the world to ash in service of his faith. And that's where the brilliance of Mikkelsen's performance lies. He makes Kaecilius the embodiment of the moral paradox at the heart of the mystic arts. The Ancient One insists there are limits that must never be crossed. Strange learns that compromise can save the world, and Kaecilius argues that surrendering to Dormammu is the only true path to freedom. Each position reflects a different philosophy about life, death, and what it means to wield power. Mikkelsen, with his gaunt expressions and weary authority, threads this existential debate into every scene. His dialogue drips with the conviction of a man who doesn't see himself as evil, but as enlightened, along with his acolytes. Someone who has found the answer and can't fathom why others cling to their chains. Even his body language, the slow, deliberate movements, the way he carries the cracked eyes of a zealot who has glimpsed eternity, all speak to a villain who believes he's not just right but merciful. The way he runs almost robotically to complete his task of getting Strange out of the way, it's almost Terminator-like. Kaecilius is feared because he believes he's already transcended morality. And that's the kind of villain only Mads Mikkelsen could bring to life. One who makes you question where the line between devotion and damnation really lies. And of course, Hannibal wasn't the only time he leaned into sheer sadism. Look at Polar, and as the assassin known as the Black Kaiser, Mikkelsen plays a retired hitman pulled back into the blood-soaked world he left behind. It's one of those anti-hero roles where the line between villain and protagonist is blurry. The violence is colder, sharper, less theatrical than something like John Wick, but that's the point. He brings a realism to the idea of an aging killer. You don't doubt for a second that this man has spent decades dismantling people for a paycheck. It's not even his best film, but it's too good to not include. I still call it my favorite movie from that year because of how much of it lives and dies on Mikkelsen's screen presence. The cinematography often frames him in solitude, sitting in the dim light of a cabin, standing in a corridor drenched in neon, or just staring out into silence. And he makes those quiet moments sing louder than any gunfight. His Black Kaiser is a living shadow who carries the weight of every kill in his bones. Even in scenes where the violence explodes into over-the-top spectacle, the camera always returns to his stillness, his weary eyes, his labored breaths, as if to remind us that this is a young man's game. Mikkelsen conveys more with a furrowed brow or a tired exhale than most action stars do with a monologue. And when the twist arrives, that gut-punch revelation tying his past to the present carnage, it reframes everything. You followed him across this brutal journey. And suddenly, the bodies, the blood, the exhaustion, they all feel heavier. Against your better judgment, you don't see a killer. You see someone trapped in a cycle that was always going to consume him. Mikkelsen weaponizes empathy. You should despise this man for the things he's done, but the way he plays the Black Kaiser forces you into his corner. It's not the slick fantasy violence of John Wick, where everything is choreographed ballet. It's harsher, slower, and messier, but far more realistic. Keanu Reeves' Wick is all about precision, a ghost in a tailored suit who moves like a machine, while Mikkelsen gives us something raw. Watch his body language, the way he limps into a fight, the slight hesitation before pulling a trigger, the subtle relief when a moment of quiet arrives. These are storytelling choices that ground him in reality. And when he does deliver dialogue, it's clipped and blunt, every word dragging the gravel of his voice across the room. Where Wick feels like a myth dressed in flesh, the Black Kaiser feels like a man who could live down your street. And that makes him infinitely more terrifying. Despite all the bloodshed, you leave Poehler with a strange sympathy for him. The finale doesn't absolve him of his sins, but Mikkelsen plays it in such a way that you can't help but feel the sting of tragedy. This is what separates him from the John Wick archetype. You're not admiring choreography or marveling at how many nameless thugs he drops in a minute. You're watching an actor pour layers into silence, into pain, into the way his eyes flicker when he remembers what he's lost. That's not to say the action is bad. The scenes themselves are great, but I can't really show the full extent of them because this movie is R-rated. The Black Kaiser is a unique archetype of the grizzled veteran, a character whose every wrinkle feels like a story you'll never hear in full. And that's why Mikkelsen comes out stronger than Wick, at least in my opinion. And then there's Arctic. Now, this isn't a villain role, but it shows exactly how ingrained that darker energy has become in Mikkelsen's craft. He plays a pilot stranded in the frozen wasteland, fighting to survive. It's a survival drama where Mads is thrown into the brutality of nature itself. He barely speaks throughout the movie, and yet his face tells 1,000 stories. Exhaustion, quiet rage, stubborn determination. Watching him drag a sled across endless snowdrifts feels just as tense as any duel with James Bond. It's not a villain role, but it carries that same undertone of suffering, control, and violence that he brings to his antagonists. Even when he's fighting the elements instead of other people, you can't shake the feeling that you're watching someone locked in battle with something bigger than himself. Fast forward to Fantastic Beasts, The Secrets of Dumbledore. Here, he steps into a role vacated by Johnny Depp because of reasons we're all aware of. Gellert Grindelwald. It could have been a forgettable entry, inheriting a polarizing villain in an already struggling franchise. But Mads treats Grindelwald with the same seriousness he brought to Hannibal, or Le Chiffre. He plays him as a manipulator, a politician cloaked in charm. His speeches drip with conviction, his eyes spark with malice, and suddenly this cartoonish wizard becomes a terrifyingly plausible real-world threat. He's like a fascist dictator you could imagine existing in the real world. It's the best compliment you can give a fantasy antagonist. He makes him real enough to scare you outside the theater. Now, outside the obvious villain roles, Mads has this uncanny ability to bring antagonistic edges, even when he's not the main bad guy. Look at The Hunt. He's not a villain here. He's a teacher falsely accused of abusing a child. But watch how he plays the aftermath. The way his neighbor's suspicion curdles into hatred, the way his body stiffens under the weight of accusations, it turns him into a different kind of antagonist. Not the bad guy, but the target of society's villainization. The performance is brutal precisely because Mikkelsen lets you see both his innocence and the ugliness projected onto him. It's a different angle on his usual persona, but still deeply tied to conflict and survival. Or take Rogue One, a Star Wars story. As Galen Erso, he's technically one of the good guys, but even here there's moral compromise. He's the scientist who designed the Death Star, racked with guilt and forced into complicity by the Empire. He's torn between his duty to his daughter and the blood on his hands. The darkness is still there, all right, lingering in every line he delivers. That's the magic of Mads. He can take a role that's purely sympathetic and twist it and make it more complex and uncomfortable. And finally, you have Valhalla Rising, where he plays One Eye, a mute warrior slave who carves his way through a bleak, mythic landscape. The silence, the brutality, the sheer intensity of his stare, he barely has to speak to dominate every frame. Watching him there, it's easy to see why Hollywood keeps casting him as villains. He doesn't need dialogue or elaborate costumes. He can just stand there, and you feel the danger in your bones. So, when you step back and look at his career, It's almost funny how consistent the pattern is. 6 of his biggest roles are straight-up villains. 3 more blur the lines but still rely on his darker instincts. It's no wonder he's typecast. Mads Mikkelsen is simply too good at being bad. He brings depth, humanity, and terrifying conviction to characters that would be forgettable in lesser hands. And while it might frustrate him as an actor to be boxed in, it's also the reason audiences can't stop watching. Mads makes villainy magnetic. He makes it beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to look away from.